Hello, I hope the volume will be steady in this video, but just in case, I'll try not to make it too long. I want to talk about the divisive and problematic concept of so-called white privilege. Um, as a concept, as a term, I hate it, and I'm going to explain why. Um, Firstly, it's a very umbrella term. It's a catch-all term. Whatever way you gloss it over, white privilege denotes all white people. All white people. That's irrefutable. It's not the privilege of privileged white people. It's white people, period. So it is absolutely a generalizing concept. Let's be absolutely clear about that. I say that because when it is pointed out to those who use the term that not all white people are privileged, they say, oh, but we know that it's not all white people. So, what do we mean by privilege? The concept of privilege is this idea that you're getting something for nothing, that it's kind of a reward. It's some sort of present or some sort of comfortable lifestyle. Well, I don't know what the demographics for white people are worldwide. I'd imagine it's probably over 1 billion people. You know, if you take most of Europe, most of North America, Russia, um, Australia, New Zealand, um, large parts of Africa, or at least segments of Africa, South Africa, Botswana, Kenya. If you A good part of South America, you know, if you take all the white people in the world, i.e., Caucasians, light-skinned Caucasians, because Indo-Iranian peoples are actually of the same ethnic group, but of darker skin. But if you take all light-skinned Caucasians around the world, it's going to be well over 1 billion people, and they represent a huge array of cultures, languages, um, and nationalities. So white people, as a concept in itself, is it's a very very generalizing term. Um, that's like lumping an Australian Aboriginal person in the same category as an Indian because they both have dark skin. So it's a very problematic idea. Um, but anyway, the London Times has reported now that apparently academics are now being given courses in terms of recognizing the white privilege. Presumably, this is only being directed at white lecturers, white professors in the UK. It's something that apparently has taken hold in the States, and now it's going to happen here. I find that very unsettling because it's the latest sign of crushing of liberty, of freedom of thought in our university campuses by regressive left control freaks and this toxic, divisive agenda of um, identity politics. I hate it, to be quite honest. I hate it because I believe it divides people. Um, and it's basically saying if you're white, you have to feel ashamed. Now, there's several people who promote this. It's white left leaning people, not everyone, but some white left leaning people. I think they are just, they're deluded and they're placating anti white racism. And yes, anti white racism does exist. Racism, in its purest definition, is holding animosity or prejudice towards someone because of the color of their skin. So if you hold animosity towards white people, that is by definition racism. I utterly reject the idea that black and Asian people cannot be racist. Of course they can. Anyone who has a brain can be racist because anyone is capable of the human flaws of bigotry, right? So the idea of white privilege is just a racist concept because it is a generalizing concept. If you point out that, I mean, I could say yesterday I walked past a homeless guy who was white. If you point out there are poor white people, there are persecuted white people in some parts of the world. Um, if you point out these things, they're not interested. The people who push this, so I said it's left leaning, I should emphasize some left leaning white people who placate this, but also racist BME people, black minority ethnic people, who are racists, and they they want to distance their own racism by attaching this kind of um, agenda to it, by insinuating that they have some sort of enlightened goal. Oh well, we're making the white people, feel guilty. Um, I can't even include everything I want to say in one single video because it really would require a lengthy lecture. But if this whole idea of white privilege the whole idea is for white people to acknowledge the crimes of colonialism, well, it's perfectly possible to acknowledge, for example, the evil of the transatlantic slave trade. And that was evil. It was one of the most heinous crimes in history. But one aspect of that that is often overlooked is that it was the British Empire and later, well, firstly the United Kingdom, then its empire that abolished the slave trade, firstly in 1807, then later across the empire in 1833, I believe it was. And it was actually the Royal Navy that patrolled the world's waters against the slave trade after we outlawed it. Now, that's not to say that we weren't complicit in it, because we were, but that side is overlooked. What I hate about the concept of white privilege is it puts all white people in one bracket. So it puts a Ku Klux Klan's high wizard in the same category as brave white people who marched alongside Martin Luther King, and in some cases suffered beatings, and in some cases were even murdered for it. There were cases in the Deep South of northern civil rights activists who were murdered by Klansmen. So I think this idea of white privilege is an insult to them. But it's an insult to every white person who has stood up for their black or Asian friends, who has denounced white supremacy. Um, but it really is a problematic term because it is insinuating that if you're white, you're automatically getting things that black and Asian people don't get. In the United Kingdom, we have very strict laws against racial discrimination. So if you're black or Asian and you're turned away from a job for that reason, you can sue the company. It's illegal. So, we see this creeping into every facet of life. We've seen it creeping into Hollywood, identity politics. Like every single film has to have a quota of white, black, Asian actors. I think it's really getting out of hand because it's now getting to the point where it's no longer about meritocracy, it's no longer about entertainment. Every single damn thing is about virtue signaling and about identity politics. I just think it's so divisive because it stirs up this mentality that it tries to encourage black and Asian people and Hispanic people that they are victims, that they're perpetual victims. Now, thankfully, not everyone is duped by this because black people are diverse, Asian people are diverse, Hispanic people are diverse, and they don't all have this victimhood mentality. So, very often, those who try to promote the victimhood narrative, what's interesting is some of the most vocal critics of identity politics are actually black and minority ethnic people because they can see through it. They resent perhaps their white friends being vilified. But I hear it. People might say, "Oh, don't take it personally." I don't take it personally against me, Nathan Hazlett, but I do resent the idea that I should feel guilty over something that is beyond my control, the color of my skin. That's absurd. And I refuse to do it. I simply refuse to do it. I believe that my duty, if you like, as a white person, is to acknowledge that there were terrible things done in the name of white-led colonialism. There were many examples of racial discrimination, and yes, there was absolutely a history there. I totally acknowledge that. But you could point to examples of white people being persecuted. I mean, white Irish people, for example, um, white people in Eastern Europe who were persecuted under Soviet communist domination. There's many, many examples. So the idea of white privilege, I find it totally toxic. I hate it. And I find it disturbing that this is now being promoted at universities. I'm not surprised, but I'm disturbed. Um, and to those white people who use the term, you're useful idiots. All you're doing is placating anti white racism. This is not an open minded concept. It's not trying to promote tolerance, it's doing the exact opposite. It's trying to promote the idea that white people are your enemy to black and Asian people. White people are your enemy. You must mistrust them. You must see them as privileged. They're keeping you down. It's the most odious, cynical, divisive thing, and I hate it. I reject white privilege. I will always condemn white supremacists, white racists, but I reject the concept of white privilege. And if anyone uses it towards me as a way of being hostile to me, I'm not going to take any prisoners. I'm not going to accept that. So if you're rude to me because I'm white, fuck you. I don't owe you anything. And that's how I see it.